The Spanish princess tells the story of young Catherine of Aragon. But how much of what we saw on screen was true, and how much was pure fiction? Did she really sleep with Prince Arthur? Was her sister Juana truly tortured by their mother, Queen Isabella? Let's take a closer look at the real history behind the series. And I promise it's more dramatic than the show itself. Did you know that The Spanish Princess was based on a series of novels? And guess who wrote them? Our favourite self-proclaimed historian, Philippa Gregory. Yes, the same author behind the other Boleyn Girl. Now, when it comes to Philippa's work, one thing is always guaranteed. Lots and lots of historical fiction. Emphasis on the fiction. Let's begin with what I actually liked. And yes, there was something. For once, we finally got to see a different side of Catherine of Aragon. In most films and series, she's usually portrayed as the older, bitter woman, the infertile rival to Anne Boleyn. But The Spanish Princess reminds us that Catherine was once young, beautiful, and full of fire. And I really appreciated seeing that proud, fierce side of her brought to life. Let's start with the first historical inaccuracy I really want to highlight, the portrayal of Catherine of Aragon's mother, Isabella of Castile. First of all, let's talk about her appearance. Contrary to how she's often portrayed on screen, with dark hair and a typical Spanish look, Isabella was actually fair-haired and light-eyed, as shown in her surviving portraits. And her daughters inherited that same appearance. That includes Juana, Catherine's sister, who also appears in the series. She wasn't a striking brunette either. So, while I give the show credit for portraying Catherine with a somewhat more accurate appearance, I have to take a point away for how Isabella and Juana were cast. Now, to the second and more dramatic embellishment. In the series, Isabella is shown as a bold warrior queen wearing full armour and riding into battle. That's pure fiction. Yes, she was present during key campaigns, like the Ford of Granada, and she did play a strong, strategic and political role. But she didn't fight, and she certainly didn't wear armour on the battlefield. She was there to inspire troops and lead as a monarch, not to swing a sword. Second major invention? The love letters Catherine supposedly received from her future husband. First of all, there's no historical evidence of any such correspondence. Secondly, even if they had exchanged letters, it would have been a purely diplomatic affair, heavily supervised by their royal parents, and definitely without any romantic or flirty content. And third, and probably most importantly, let's not forget that little Harry was only 10 years old when Catherine first arrived in England. Yes, you heard that right. Our beloved red-headed heartthrob wasn't exactly a dashing young suitor at that point. He was a child. Here's a bust often attributed to 7-year-old Prince Henry. Now, add 3 years. And that's what your future multi-divorced ladies' man actually looked like when Catherine met him. Fun fact, he really did attend Catherine's wedding to his brother Arthur and even walked her down the aisle. But no, he wasn't secretly in love with his new sister-in-law. He was just a little boy. Now, let's get to the most heated question of all. Did Catherine of Aragon and Prince Arthur actually sleep together? Because the Spanish princess certainly made up its mind, painting Catherine as a deceiver who misled the entire royal family by claiming she was still a virgin. But, as historian David Starkey points out in his book on Henry's 6 wives, only God knows what really happened between Catherine and Arthur on their wedding night. One of Arthur's servants, Sir Anthony Willoughby, claimed that the next morning Arthur said, "Willoughby, bring me a cup of ale, for I have been this night in the midst of Spain." He also allegedly told his attendants, "Master, it is good pastime to have a wife." But was that actually true? Or just teenage bravado from a 15-year-old boy? We just don't know for certain. At the time, it was widely assumed they had consummated the marriage. However, Doña Elvira, Catherine's first lady of the bedchamber, wrote to Catherine's parents after Arthur's death, assuring them that their daughter was still a virgin. The consummation or non-consummation of Catherine's first marriage was not an issue when she married Henry VIII in 1509, as the couple were given a dispensation by the Pope. But the topic reared its ugly head when Henry wanted his marriage to Catherine annulled, so that he could marry his new love, Anne Boleyn. Catherine testified on oath that she had not slept with her first husband, saying that when she married Henry, "I was a true maid, without touch of a man." And she had also told Henry VII that she was still a virgin when he was first thinking of marrying her off to his second son. In her book on Henry's 6 wives, Alison Weir argues that Catherine was a religious woman of sound principles. It is far less likely, therefore, that she was guilty of deception than that she was telling the truth. And I have to agree with her. So, what's your take? Was something more going on behind the closed doors of their marriage? By the way, the series makes it feel like everything happened over the course of just a few weeks. But in reality, Catherine and Arthur were married for 5 months before his death from England's most mysterious illness at the time, sweating sickness. Yes, the same disease that nearly killed Anne Boleyn years later. And because the show rushes through everything, it completely glosses over what came next. Catherine's 7-year struggle in England. Arthur died in 1502. Catherine and Prince Henry were betrothed in 1503, when he was just 12 years old. Then, in 1505, one day before the marriage was meant to be formalised, Henry withdrew from the agreement. They barely saw each other, just exchanged formal gifts from afar. Henry only became king in 1509, at the age of 17, and finally married Catherine that year. During those long, uncertain years, Catherine faced serious financial hardship, ongoing political manoeuvring over her dowry, and constant uncertainty about her future. Oh, and yes, she really did become the first female ambassador in European history. But again, this wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was 7 long years of diplomatic limbo. What actually made me the most angry was how the series portrayed Margaret Beaufort. They turned a smart, ambitious woman, the matriarch of an entire dynasty, into a villain, scheming against Catherine and her marriage to Henry. But did Margaret hate Catherine? Absolutely not. In fact, she supported Catherine's marriage to Henry, fully understanding the importance of an alliance with Spain. She was even involved in preparing their wedding, though that happened in the final months of her life. In her will, Margaret left Catherine £202 and 10 shillings. Clearly not something she would have done if she despised her. In the series, Margaret Beaufort is shown coldly and indifferently rushing to marry off her granddaughter, Margaret, to King James IV of Scotland. But in reality, she begged her son not to send the girl too early. She feared that James wouldn't delay consummating the marriage, which could harm Margaret and put her health at serious risk. Margaret Beaufort herself had barely survived a traumatic childbirth at the age of 13. She knew all too well the dangers early childbirth posed to young girls. And then there's the claim that she murdered the princes in the tower. The show even has her haunted by their ghosts on her deathbed. But Margaret had neither motive, means, nor opportunity to kill them in 1483. At the time, she was a powerless noblewoman, married to Lord Stanley, while her son was living in exile in Brittany. Her movements were restricted, and she had no access to the tower. The series was no kinder to Juana, Catherine's sister. She's portrayed as a scheming, cruel and jealous woman, who even sleeps with Henry. Let's unpack that. Juana did indeed stay in England briefly in 1506 after being forced to dock due to a severe storm, and she reunited with her sister during that time. But Juana was not hostile toward Catherine. She was simply withdrawn, overwhelmed by her grief and the trauma of an abusive marriage. The real Juana was a quiet, devout and emotionally fragile woman. One of the most absurd claims in the series is that Queen Isabella tortured her daughter, Juana, hanging her up and tying weights to her ankles as punishment for heresy. There's absolutely no evidence for this. Isabella was strict, yes, but to suggest she physically abused her daughter is pure nonsense. Isabella is remembered as a strong and pious woman, whose political ambitions sometimes clashed with the personal freedoms of her children. But she was no sadist. She personally oversaw her daughter's education, ensuring they were well versed in languages, diplomacy and theology. Letters and accounts from the time show a mother who cared deeply for her children's well-being, arranging strategic marriages to secure their futures. There's no record of her ever using physical violence against them. And then there's the show's insinuation that something sexual happened between young Henry and Juana. Yet again, complete fiction. At the time, Henry was just 14. Juana was 27 and obsessively in love with her husband, to the point of extreme jealousy. It's hard to believe that a deeply religious woman, emotionally consumed by her marriage, would have been attracted to a teenage boy. In short, the series took a rather strange approach to all of its female characters. Catherine of Aragon is portrayed as a manipulative woman, obsessed only with the English crown, Margaret Beaufort as a scheming mastermind, and Elizabeth of York as cold and emotionally detached. Even Henry VII comes across more like a mother's boy than the strong, determined ruler he actually was. What did you think of these portrayals? Which character do you feel was treated most unfairly? Let's take a pause here and continue the conversation in the comments. Just like I did with the Tudors, this will be part 1 covering season 1. And if you're interested, I'll definitely create part 2 for season 2. See you in the next video.